Colleagues.
Sinon, vers la cheminée, parce que sinon ça fait pas le tour. Voilà.
Dear colleagues, welcome to our webinar organized by the IPA website editorial board. Thank you for being so many to participate and from many IPA societies. I was told you are 1,300 registered participants to follow the webinar broadcast. Our session today is dedicated to Julia Kristeva and her work on feminine, a research axis and personal engagement she follows since many years now. She presents us the main points of her work during her lecture as special guest of the opening ceremony at the recent IPA Congress in London. You can download the text, the presentation text of today, as well as the presentation text at the Congress. It is at the Hangouts. But before introducing you, Julia Kristeva, let me give you some organizational informations. As usual, the webinar will be divided in two parts. During the first slot, our distinguished guest will introduce some main points of her work on feminine over time, and she will focus on the feminine today in its psychic, private, and public dimensions of its existence. It will be a question of updating the forms of the relationship with the feminine and the world. During the second slot, the question and answer session, it is you, attendees. You can ask your questions and Julia will answer and discuss as many as possible. Already during the presentation, you can post your question. For doing so, please post your question in the question pane on the right-hand side of your screen. You have to go to the questions line. There is a small white arrow that precedes the word questions. Click on it to open the question box, type your question and send it. During the question session, we will try to send you in your chat box the questions asked and you could read them. It is just below the question box. Julia Kristeva will try to answer to as many questions as possible. And now, Julia Kristeva. Dearest Julia, I'm delighted to welcome you at this webinar. We know each other as we have worked together for many years. And I think that our colleagues, also the colleagues that participate to our webinar, they know you well, as you are the ambassadress of psychoanalysis to the world of thought and culture. You are training analyst at the Paris Psychoanalytical Society, but we need a lot of qualifiers in order to present your intellectual and scientific profile. Psychoanalyst, cultural philosopher, literary critic, novelist, linguist, having occupied several academic responsibilities, professor at the Paris University, doctor honoris causa of about 10 internationally prestigious universities, just to mention Harvard, member of the British Academy, of the American Academy of Arts and Science, founder of the Roland Barthes Institute of Humanities, of the French National Council of Disability. You were awarded for your lifetime scientific, social, cultural, and political activities by the Legion of Honor, by the Order of Merit. You were awarded by the Holberg International Memorial Prize, the equivalent of Nobel Prize for Social Science, also by Hannah Arendt Prize. Regarding the feminine, our theme today, you founded the Simone de Beauvoir Prize for Women Freedom, rewarding the work and the action of people that contribute to promoting the freedom of women. And you published the trilogy, The Feminine Genius, Life, Madness, Words, devoted to three women of the 20th century, Hannah Arendt, Melanie Klein, and Colette. Your last contribution of Feminine is the keynote paper, Prelude to an Ethics of the Feminine, at the 51st IPA Congress in London last summer. This is from where we will start today. Taking as starting point Freud's statement that feminine is due to an unknown characteristic impossible to grasp, Du says, you propose a constant transformation not only of the feminine, but of the subject in general, and even more of the psychic device that is propelled in an open and endless process. The feminine as psychic element participates and promotes the transformability process of the psychic. This is a major concern into the actual biopolitical universal context and the evolutivity of norms. Nevertheless, you propose some cornerstones. The denatured sexuality, based on the instinctual sexual disjunction, the two phases of the female Oedipus, the maternal experience, the reliance, the need to believe. We'll have the pleasure to listen to you and to present us these developments and discuss with us on these points. Dear Julia, please.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Eliana, for this presentation. Dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being here in this seminar this afternoon, and thank you to the IPA website to welcoming us. As it has been already said, I presented in last July on the 51 Congress of IPA in the very impressive Broad Century of Westminster, a paper called The Prelude to an Ethic of the Feminine that you can find in the website, I think. And when preparing this presentation for today, I had the impression that there are two main problematics that are already in this paper, and I invite you to go back to this presentation. Two main questions that need some clarification. The first one is my comprehension of psychoanalytic ethics, and the second one is what I call denatured sexuality. I think that this is my expression, resuming Freudian conception of psychosexuality. So, first the ethics and then the denatured sexuality. As you know, being an analyst is solitary work, a solitude aggravated by today's hyper-connected globalization, and which has, as W.R. Bion wrote, no other companion than the patient, who by definition is an unreliable one. End quote. I subscribe to this solitude fully, and yet this begs the question, why? Why accept the analyst's solitude? The answer I have to offer, and it will lead us to the feminine, is that this unreliable transfer, counter-transfer coupling does not rely on a particular organ or on the analyst's desire, but on a sort of ethics. An ethics in suspension, by which I mean that judgment and the world are suspended, put between quotations. Some that are acquainted with phenomenology know this very well. So suspended, put in question between quotations, so that they can be more aptly questioned, and this by giving themselves a direction. Where it was, there shall the ego be or become. This is the Freudian direction. Wo es war, soll ich werden. Where it was, there shall the ego be or become. with two opposing principles that you know as well too, the pleasure principle and the reality principle. Philosophical reflection on the aspiration of happiness, and this is clearly a matter of this, the analysand looking for a good and just life, how to be more happy when coming to see us. So this aspiration for happiness began around 2000 years ago. Contemporary thought on this field habitually distinguishes the imperative target of morality, founded on the obligation of the norms, from the optative target of ethics, based on choice and will. It is where desire, dear to Freudians, comes into play, with a concern for the self, with the others, and institutions. Here, the norm does not disappear from the ethical quest, but biopolitics is advancing a different conception of the norm as a dynamic concept. I'm going to try to convince you that the feminine, carried forth by the Freudian discovery of the unconscious, is the galvanizing factor because of its own transformability. The feminine is the galvanizing factor of the Freudian notion of the ethics because of the transformability of the feminine itself. The feminine is transformative. Whatever our wandering and limits may be, and beyond our resistance and any external and internal criticism directed to psychoanalysis, it must be recognized that by investigating the logic of the drives and desires of both sexes, psychoanalysis became an originating factor of the disruption of normative morality. And I'm saying this because if we don't say it, who will? Psychoanalysis continued to act as such, detecting the malaise inherent of the social bond. In the constraining character the course of civilization is taking, says Freud in Malaise in the Civilization, the discontent of civilization. Despite, but also intrinsic to the today's unbridled liberalism and the automatization of our species. In Freud's wake, we, psychoanalysts, we testify against the frustration, the refusal, the Versagung of sexual life, which can even take the shape of pornography, by wagering, Freud warns that he's waiting, on the eternal eros, I'm quoting against from the discontent of civilization, he's waging on the eternal eros to make an effort to assert himself in the combat against its equally immortal adversary, which is the death instinct. Yet, for 2,500 years that ethics had existed, it has rejected the feminine as a subject, occasionally allowing it the status of object, if even that. The rare modern philosophers committed to the question try to avoid the active-passive binary by shelving women in pre-ethics, women as guardian of the home, as hospitality and welcome queen, and more subtly as an embodiment of ambiguity itself and an example of equivocation and fragility. I'm thinking of the work from Ricoeur, Levinas, or Derrida. Some of them generously relegate women to the realm of care, though in this point they were preceded by British theoretical philosophers and sociologists inspired by the political utopia of a good society and influenced by Melanie Klein's notion of reparation. Yet, the feminine continues to haunt researchers who probe the origins of hominization. An odd musing of Claude Lévi-Strauss, maybe some of you know his book, latest books called Nous sommes tous cannibales, all of us are cannibals. Here in this book, he advances that psychosexuality, which I call denatured sexuality, is originally feminine. I quote, that's what Lévi-Strauss writes, the only mammals ready to engage in sexual intercourse with our ostriches, women were able to signal their moods with words. End of the quote, which means that we're left to assume the pulled cords of the female libido vibrated so fervently for the male penis that her genitals migrated to the vocalization of the language. There was a sexualization of language itself. This is Lévi-Strauss, how to say, dream or hallucination or suggestion. In other words, these prehistoric women were not reduced to their sexual organs. The very fiber of women's words get them turned on. It is language, possessing particularities that singularize, which operates what Freud had called the psychic revolution of matter. I invite you to read the two principles in the course of the psychic development from 1911 by Freud. This psychic revolution of matter that displaces the sexual animal instinct in drives. We speak of Triebe, in German, drives, and not instincts, because these drives are already linguistically, psychically transmitted to the others and to ourselves, and definitely psychosexual, not organic, but psychic and biological, of course, but on the crossroad of the two. Thus, it will be the entire geography of the female body that bursts and disseminates against and besides what some psychoanalysts still call the genital primacy. And I find a very nice resume of this entire geography of the female body that participates in the sexuality in Colette. She writes this following: my entire skin has a soul. Isn't it beautiful? It's excited and psychic. Entire skin has a soul. Now, the mythical origin that will help me to present you my notion of denatured sexuality. The mythical origin of hominization presented the disjunction between the instinctual and the sexual. And this is the denaturing of human sexuality, as well as the split of female sexuality with its atrophied organ, a poor inch of flesh, as Shakespeare wrote, and Freud quoted it in Civilization and Its Discontent. This divided structure does not in itself generate psychosis, but will be worked through and transformed into precisely the transformative structuration of feminine double infinite Oedipus. We often say that feminine Oedipus is unfinished, incomplete. I'll say that it is infinite, because in saying incomplete, we mean that once it will be finished and completed and recognize the Oedipus, the realization of women will be achieved. It's not my case. My idea is that there is a permanent development of the feminine psyche, which is not an adaptation to the Oedipal framework, but permanent creativity and source of transformations of the social frame also. So, but come back again to the prehistorical ancestors of nowadays humanity. The prehistoric imagination sends us a video of this human denaturing of sexuality. A giant vulva topped by a bison head, which can be called the door to hell. The theologians will say this. But this vulva, topped by a bison head, seems to call and follow a pack of running animals, a zoomorphic representation of human drives. In this picture, we don't have body, we don't have face, just neither body nor face, the split feminine, vulva and bison heads, incarnates and incites the perpetual excitement in which the male projects and recognizes themselves. We can go to your computer and say the Chauvet growth from 31,000 before present. In this origin of the world, l'origine du monde, don't the prehistoric rock artists, these excited bisons, exhibit their own crazed and fleeting castration? What is retained from this humanity, denatured by the psychic revolution of the matter, is only a smattering, a schematic graffiti. They are presented themselves in a schematic graffitis, and the multiplicity of positive and negative prints of creative hands. These humans, men and women, transcended by their psycho-sexual, mental, psycho-representative, psycho-linguistic, psycho-pictorial sexuality, know that they are also mortal. The oldest graves date back from 45,000 before present. They are capable of representing the libido, hinged as it is to mortality, through the burst of language and through its flourishing in the culture of images. What we see here is a feminine entry, sepulchre, maybe, or a feminine exit in graffiti, a perpetual beginning, a new leading to inviolable transformations. In speaking about cave art, I'm emphasizing how the discovery of sexual difference was marked by violence and how in this day it continues to frighten and enchant heterosexuality. The violence of this split resists being reabsorbed into the castration fantasy or the killing of the father that are the cornerstones of Freudian theory, nor does it reduce itself to a psychotic mechanism. To differentiate it from the latter, let us call it the splitting, we use in French the word the refront, of human psychosexuality. Heterosexuality, in its aspect of desire but also anxiety, acts out and exhibits the splitting of being in human life, despite feats in artificial reproduction and the acceptation of homosexuality. Boys and girls discover the difference of their sexual organs, both with fascination and hesitation, even repugnance. It remains for us to narrow in how the feminine double Oedipus, modulated by socio-political shifts in the feminine condition, succeeds in transforming this inaugural and constitutive splitting, and to examine how it gets expressed in symptoms or even finds its sweet spot in what Lacan, with his grim humor, called the heterosexual comedy. When civilization and its discontent flares, Freud writes, in response to this uneasiness, his two studies, which not only rework his theory of female sexuality that he presented before, that was stuck in the Oedipus complex. I mean, and I'll invite you to reread again the last works of Freud on female sexuality from 1931 and femininity in new introductory lectures on psychoanalysis from 1933, but also assigns to psychoanalysis the new task of finding the connection between the doctrine of bisexuality and the doctrine of drives. Femininity is connected with the permanent modulation of Freud's thinking about sexuality and its different aspects and resonations. Freud's hypothesis of two phases of the feminine Oedipus, with a shift of object from mother to father, as well as the incomplete feminine Oedipus, I already referred to it, and I call it not incomplete but infinite, were further developed and expanded upon in psychoanalytical research, notably by women analysts. And in my lecture in the last Congress, I developed my own notion of these two phases of feminine Oedipus that you'll find in the paper you have on the website. They uncover what I call today the transformative feminine, a factor of the psychic life's transformability, considered not as apparatus, but as a soul life, or the life of the soul. To use Françoise Coblan's expression, she's a member of our institute, and I'm very close to her notion of the dynamic of psychosexuality as a permanent transformative process in which the feminine sexuality plays an important role, and the feminine in the masculine too. Freud, despite his prejudices, never denigrated women, as have been said by some feminists that have not enough time maybe to read him in the totality, the transformation, the vitality of his thinking. Today, I see how his work, and last work essentially, defends and illustrates the denatured difference of the sexes. As in his analysis, carried premonition, as if his analysis carried a premonition of certain anti-normative aspects of gender theory. He described a psychic polyphonic bisexuality, which is firstly doubled on both sides of this differentiation, the feminine side of men and the feminine side of women, the masculine side of men and the masculine side of women. The game gets played by a foursome, at least, while being conjugated in the singular. An open structured sexuality of speaking being take shape, one which generates tension and conflicts, anguish and pleasure. What we have here is an unbearable multiverse of singular unconsciousness of one particular woman and one particular man that the psychoanalysis does not program or judge or calculate, but accompany in a process of transformation. This choice and this ethics, whose norms, whose very identities, man, woman, become dynamic concepts, entail an angst-ridden, jubilant, and risky freedom. So I want to underline this, that this multiverse of the sexuality, which is bisexual in the both sides, feminine and masculine, and that is very singular, which means multiverse in the astronomic sense of the word, is not a promise of happiness and something very idealistic. It's an angst-ridden, jubilant, and risky freedom, for better and for worse. And psychoanalysts are here in order to recognize this and to accompany this multiverse sexuality, this singular sexuality, for more creativity in the modern world. I would like to revive this point of my presentation, the unanswered question which Freud put to Marie Bonaparte. Was will das Weib, he says. What does a woman want? Listening closely to hear the question is not about desire, is not about Wunsch, but about will, wollen. It is no longer a matter of the enigmatic dark continent that ducks the headlights of science, nor it is a Weltanschauung for the psychoanalytic that the psychoanalyst must entreat. Annoyed and curious, surely, Freud, asking what does a woman want, as I imagine him, remains suspended by the question, by ethics. In his work before 1920, the unconscious was infantile. Freud could well have embraced the words of Wordsworth, "The child is the father of man." And in the psychoanalytic questioning, we try to find the child in us. His subsequent work, in which he re-engages with the death drive and delves into the bisexual aspect of female sexuality and in every sexuality, might he have taken up Louis Aragon's adage, La femme est l'avenir de l'homme, as says Aragon. Woman is the future of man. Freud had a good sense of humor, but perhaps not so dark. His suspended question about feminine will invites us to deepen the transformative feminine as an in-progress development, as a becoming. I noticed that the presentation that Eliana gave to my work, she spoke about the transformative as essential for me. I will avoid the notion of essential, because we know that there are a lot of fights between feminists, but between essentialists and differentialists, etc. When I say that the transformative is important, this characteristic for the feminine, it is in a sense of in-progress development, in a sense of becoming, and not a being close because it's a transformation. The transformation is open, is infinite. Arguing with Freud in the same field that I'm trying to remember you today about this transformative, which is not an essence, but in progress development, I'll put some considerations by Simone de Beauvoir. Maybe you know that arguing with Freud, but also declaring him, I'm quoting from Beauvoir, one of this century's men she most warmly admires. I don't know if you are well acquainted with this formulation of Beauvoir, but it's quite surprising because she's quite critical, but at the same time she says this, one of this century's men she most warmly admires. Simone de Beauvoir seems to revisit Freudian ideas and mine that are Freudian, but I think I sharpen them and I try to develop them and to make them more recognized, to transmit them. So his ideas on the transformative feminine in existential terms. When she writes, I mean Beauvoir, she writes the following, and you know this, one is not born woman, one becomes one becomes woman. As a psychoanalyst, on ne naît pas femme, on le devient. As a psychoanalyst who listens out for mobile, multiverse feminine subjectivity, I would be inclined to change a little bit her formulation and to say, one is born woman, but I become feminine or not. One is born biologically and anatomically for female, and tagged at birth by the parents' imaginary projections. Look, it's a girl, and the child is born. Their exclamations, dismayed or overjoyed, welcomes us at birth. Yet, not one, but I, one is an anonymous creature, but I try to become a feminine speaking subject in daddy culture. This authority to become a feminine or not, I can choose not to. I have the choice. This is my transformative possibilities that are inherent to my psychosexuality. This authority is not learned. It is incarnated in feminine, not only structurally, given to the two Oedipal phases, which get reworked and diversified over the course of the life, but also because women experience authority in the social and political space. To avoid neutralizing the feminine in the neutral gender is to do justice to the women who come to our couches looking for a new life, a kind of survival, and to connect to their creativity. It is to answer to my friends that are working in the gender studies and whose work I appreciate very much, why I'm trying also not to neutralize the feminine, being very attentive to the liberating aspects of the gender theory too. To avoid neutralizing the feminine in the neutral gender is to do justice to the women who come to our couches looking for a new life, a kind of survival, and to connect to their creativity. But also is to do justice for some 700 million women worldwide who are married by force, and some 130 million girls who are genitally mutilated, victims of diverse belief systems and fundamentalism. As some of you know, I'm very much involved in this fight, combat, engagement for the rights of women all over in the different culture and globalization. And I presented the Hannah Arendt Prize for Political Thought that have been bestowed to me in Germany in 2006 to the Afghan women who set themselves on fire, having no recourse but to surrender to the dead drive, so that the NGOs working in the field could help their survival. I developed these ideas in my speech on the opening ceremony of the IPA 51 Congress in London. I developed more passionately what I understand by Oedipus I, Oedipus II, the connection with the mother, love and hate between a woman and the little girl and her mother, and then the passage to the object of the father as a desire object, and the transformative sexuality in the maternal eroticism, what they call relance. So I'll take some questions on this problematic that you have already read, that are available in the IPA website. And in the discussion, maybe, if we have the occasion to do this, I'll be happy to present also some vignettes in order to illustrate my ideas in the discussion to follow. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, dear Julia. I think that we are going to start with our questions. So the first one is, how does the denaturalization of sexuality affect the subject narcissism? Do you want me to repeat?
Oui. Have I to answer every question or give me some questions?
No, I'm giving you each one at time.
Oui.
How does the denaturalization of sexuality affect the subject narcissism?
The denatured sexuality is due to the fact that we are speaking beings. Narcissist is also a speaking being. And this speaking means that the excitation is as well biological as it is psychic and linguistic. The splitting of the human body and the human entity is presented in the genealogy, in the memory of the human species, with the biological map adapted to this splitting, and that's how Freud called the psychological revolution of the matter. So we have the equipment of for the splitting, the biological equipment for mentalization, from psychization. narcissism is an essential, how to say, station in the Freud conception of the subjectivization. But in my mind, it was very important in the Freudian framework. But in my mind, it was deepened and complexified by Melanie Klein's comprehension of the stage of depressive position, depressive position, the other one, which is schizoparanoid position. So if we take into account these two aspects of the early child behavior, we have a sort of more complicated psychic map before presenting it as a narcissistic belonging to a sort of a defensive identity, which means only autoconservation and survival of the individual as such. The individual is already in a situation of be bursting with schizoparanoid and depressive tendencies. What happens with narcissists is something very interesting from the point of view of the myth itself, and the point of view of what Freud wants to make be retained from the myth. In the myth, narcissist, if he is belonging only to his image, will die. The narcissist doesn't have any place in the world of communication and of authority. Narcissist has to recognize that some voice, echo, the otherness exists. The problem is how this the modern world can help those who have narcissistic tendencies to survive in the world where the communication is based on the image and narcissistic gratifications. And here the psychoanalytic utilization in the course of psychoanalysis of images and not only of speech is very important. In my work, The New Maladies of the Soul, I give an example of a patient who came on the couch with a very strong obsessional structure and defensive attitude towards his work, towards his business, towards his sexuality. And when I understood that he is very much interested by images, he brought me his painting, and we worked through a representation, visual representation, in order to gratify him, but also to see how the destructive impulses and drives are beneath this very smooth and gratifying surface of the image. So don't rely only on narcissism, but try to see what is beneath it and interpret the aggressivity that is behind the narcissistic screen.
Thank you.
Is it satisfactory for our auditor? Or anyhow, we shall continue.
We shall continue, and you will have the opportunity, maybe you will have the opportunity to explain further with more questions. Another question. As you had mentioned your speech in London, I would like to ask you if you could explain further your statement. The problem is the heterosexuality. I understand it as related to dealing with differences, for example, but it would be nice to have your thoughts on this, please.
Well, it's a very, very important question because it has to do with the sexual difference, but also with the modernity where we reach different ways of reproduction and survival of the human species. And also we have to take into account the position of maternal vocation, maternal function, and paternal too. So in order to summarize, I'll present again what I said at the Congress presentation, taking into account the transformations of mentality today first, and I'll finish with the heterosexuality. Well, today women want to be free and to decide whether or not to be mother, and some of them eagerly turn to assisted motherhood without prejudice. Is this because the presubjective aspect of feminine eroticism that I found out in the catexis between the woman girl and the woman mother, in which the sameness makes sensorial implication between two different positions and a sort of presubjective emotional and instinctual modality in the subjective construction. This sort of depossession of the self, depossession of the narcissism even, which is sort of resonating, affective ground in the female, the feminine comprehension and experience of the sexuality. Is this because this presubjective aspect of feminine eroticism familiarizes us with the possession of the self, that modern sciences imposes on us the different medical, technical means for continuing the species, but a lot of us are able to go in this direction and to avoid the intercourse with the other sex. At the same time, I have to go back to the second position in the development of the feminine sexuality, which is the catexis of the paternal figure. And in this catexis of the paternal, the phallic position, the feminine is also in identification with the father, but also the feminine experience herself as a foreigner to this phallic dogma of the paternal societies. So this another music of the feminine sexuality that belongs to the feminine transformative sexuality makes the feminine more adaptive to the modern society and also in the core of the transformation of it. But the transformative feminine in this configuration, if you take into account these different facets, can be able to modulate its own structure into dynamic concepts and to join the ethics of the transformation that is the ethics of the modern democratic society, but which is also the ethics of psychoanalysis itself. So this is these are some remarks that in a sense summarize my comprehension of the double Oedipus in feminine and this plasticity of the transformability of the sexuality of women. And the second theme that I have, the second topic I have to consider is that given this from the one side, we have to consider also that as far as the procreation of the human species is not anymore considered to depend on the heterosexuality. The heterosexuality is no longer seen as the surest and the only means of giving life and guaranteeing future generations. And in the same time, the mirage of the primal scene, Mama and Papa are behind all these transformations of same-sex or one-sex parental couple, remains as a original fantasy that structures the unconscious of each individual. This situation fragilized every couple, heterosexual and homosexual. And on the third aspect of the picture will be that the heterosexual couple is fragile because women's liberation accentuates the singular feminine of mothers and female lovers and disturbs men who feel with women what Colette called a danger of homosexuality. Is it a danger or maybe a desire for homosexuality, a hope, and this being the background of the picture of the modern family, it seems to me that the couple, be it bisexual, two sexuals, or one sexual, remains as enigmatic, scandalous, detestable, and therefore desirable situation. And that's why I said that homosexuality is and will continue to be the problem. What do the psychoanalysis in front of this? From that point on, and yes, no, I said heterosexuality. No, not homosexuality is not the problem. It is the problem for some classic comprehension, but of the sexuality. But in our modern societies, the opinion is the decisive factor, and the opinion in our democratic countries is quite open to this new modern aspects of new families, although there are quite of resistance, and then cautious is also reactionary. But I think this is not. It is maybe more original and more difficult to consider that heterosexuality is and will continue to be a problem. Why to have two sexes? Because we can have love between two same sex, and the sameness maybe gives different other conflicts, but it's also available. Heterosexuality is and will continue to be the problem. I say this in a provocative way, because from that point on, and because we have the memory of the heterosexuality as a fundamental of the human species, from that point on, beginning from and with the singular transformative feminine, we are confronted with the metamorphosis of parenthood. And the psychoanalysis has the role not to allow or to make the law or to calculate or to prescribe, but to be prepared to accompany this transformation of the parenthood that will be infinite.
Okay, so another question related. How could you envision the role of the father, given that the paternal function will be seen as in decline globally, in the light of the transformative feminine and the fatherly role of the woman in the future?
This is a subsequent question of what I said in a polemical way. Heterosexuality is and will be the problem. At the risk to appear as a conservative, I'll say that Freud invites us to be the inheritor of the memory of humanity, not only of our family, the generation before us, but the memory of human species. And that's what I said when I emphasized the fact that in our memory, the primal sin between two sexes appears, be the family monoparental or one sex. So this memory of the two parents makes the human family as a triad, the child, the father and the mother. The thirdness seems to us psychoanalysts as an essential factor for the stabilization of the transformative subjectivity. This triad could be repressive, it could be weak, it could be abusive, but it is necessary for the construction of the subjectivity, for this split, denatured sexuality, which means that it's on the crossroad between biology and representation, be it linguistic or pictorial. And we are going for the society that overestimate, overemphasize pictures instead of language, or both of them in the best situation. So what we have to consider in this framework is how to preserve this thirdness. And the therapist, the teacher, the coach, the grandmother, the grandfather can represent this third function. But the question remains, and we don't have a definitive answer today. Is it possible that this thirdness avoids the sexual difference? In my conception, in my practice, I consider that is something important, that the masculine sexuality is present in the construction of the child environment and development. But it is an open question, and we shall see how the coming generations will organize themselves in this framework. This is one of the surprises of the aggravating acceleration of the humanity that we undergo today. In this framework, again, I think that contrary to what he said about psychoanalysis, our critics said that we're conservative, and maybe there are people like that, but I think the psychoanalysis is well positioned in order to consider the how complicated this question is, and to accompany it is the more how to say, plasticity and respect as possible, without having preconceived models.
Mm-hmm. Okay, maybe we'll come back later. Another question now. Please, why abjection is more violent between mother and daughter than mother and idealized son?
It's more violent because the repression of the paternal society, as I call the daddy culture, is not immediately present in this early mother-girl relationship, the osmosis, the empathy, the Einfühlung between the two is coded in a pre-linguistic means of expression that I call a semiotic chorus, which means gestures, rhythm of the voice, chants, some taste, different senses, all this pre-verbal situation where the more archaic psychization is required. And in this realm of interaction, of sameness and fusion, the identification is one of the movements, of the tendencies, but also the inverse, which is a part of the human and every animal life, animal construction, which is the aggressivity and the defense against the harmony, the disruption, the pleasure of annihilation. And so because of the suspension of the paternal or social taboo, the love and the hate emotions have a more free course than with the son, who is representative of the idealized society and the transmission of the values.
So I'm trying to find the next question. If we follow Gaia's assessment of the couple's enjoyment, 9 out of 10 for the woman.
Well, I don't have the script and it's difficult to understand. Can you write it?
I will try. So, if we follow Gaia's assessment of the couple's enjoyment, la jouissance, 9 out of 10 for the woman, 1 out of 10 for the man, what consequences of the ethics of each one?
I don't have the text. Where it is? We don't have the...
Ok, je vais la répéter. If we follow a Gaia's assessment of the couple's enjoyment.
What is this, the Gaia assessment? I don't understand Gaia assessment.
Gaia, c'est la terre, la divinité terre en ancienne Grèce. Et assessment, à mon avis, c'est la jouissance de la terre, qui était la jouissance c'était le témoignage.
Gaia, ouais.
Le témoignage. Le témoignage.
You refer to the mythology? What is this? Gaia, ça veut dire quoi? La terre?
La divinité terre,
de la terre.
Oui, qu'elle donne son avis, qu'elle atteste, que les couples, la jouissance d'un couple, il y a 9 parts pour l'homme, et 9 parts pour la femme et 1 part pour l'homme. Je perds mon latin.
I don't know what is the
follow Gaia's assessment of the couple's enjoyment.
Gaia's, I don't know what is Gaia.
C'est la déesse terre, la divinité terre en ancienne Grèce.
Why do you have taken into account this myth? What is the legitimacy of this assessment?
I lost my first question. That is why I'm just having a part. Okay. Here is
the couple enjoyment 9 out of 10 for the woman. We mean that the pleasure, the jouissance is most women have more jouissance than men. I don't understand the question.
Okay, I will try to say it differently.
Say another one.
Yeah, rephrase.
Rephrase.
Thank you, Kristeva, for this very engaged lecture. Do you think there is a link between the depth of the ethic and the feminine capacity to follow a sensual regression? Does this capacity have specific consequences on the feminine ethic?
Je n'ai pas compris la question. Can you repeat the question?
Yes.
The feminine are more ethics. We don't have any more the script of the questions.
But I have highlighted. So, thank you, Julia Kristeva.
I understood that you thank me, and I appreciate very much. I apologize again for my English, because as you already understood, it's better for me to think in French than in English. But I hope that some ideas have been conveyed to you. Now, can you put it in
So,
script?
do you think that there is a link between the depth of the ethic and the feminine depth, la profondeur, la profondeur
depth, oui.
of the ethic and the
Oui.
feminine capacity to follow a sensual regression? Does this capacity?
Sexual regression?
The capacity to have what the feminine will have maybe to after this 51st Congress, you have to make a 52nd maybe about the masculine sexuality, and here I will develop again the multiverse possibility of men too, because once liberated from the phallic pose position or whatever role, they can recognize their femininity too, and that's what happens today again. So the feminine as a transformability, as a plasticity, as a perpetual becoming can be assumed sometimes more by men than by women. I don't know, you can compare James Joyce and his femininity to a stiff lady that is making sort of a fuss and interdictions and manners, and that is not at all transformative. So the subjective construction is a work of art, and that's what we try to encourage in the couch. Sometimes people ask what is the goal of the psychoanalytic cure. I'll not say as Aragon says, the woman is the future of men, not invite them, all men to become women, but to try to smooth their decisions, their features, their positions, and not to adapt, but to accompany the transformation of mentalities, which is difficult to do without the companionship of the other. My problematic, this is something that psychoanalysis has to deal to, is how to harmonize the two sexes in their development to be multiverse, each of them. How to maintain their difference, which will be more subtle than, for instance, 3 centuries ago, or 19th century even compared to today. But we need a culture that is able to recognize this singularization of sexuality from the both sides of the sexual difference, and nevertheless to try to maintain a kind of harmony between the two. I quote very often, and this is, I think, in my paper in the Congress, sentence by a French poet from the 19th century that Proust used to quote, who says that les deux sexes vont mourir chacun de son côté. Both sexes will die, everyone from his part, alone. And this is something each apart, each alone. This is something that is audible on our couches too. People don't know how to live together. It is something that is also important in homosexual couples too. How to live with the other. Not the sameness, not in the narcissistic fusion, but recognizing the otherness in the both sides of the sexual difference, but simply to the other person. And when there are two sexes, is maybe more difficult in the modern day because of the archaism and because of also the difficulties of men to be transformative. But this is one thing. But the problematic of our psychoanalytic treatment is to approach this situation and to make a wage that if the civilization, not only Western, but the culture as a transmission of the memory and renewing the planet. One of the questions were about maybe Gaia was connected with the future of the ecosystem, I suppose, will be to maintain this possible harmonization of the singularities. You just said that your presentation, Eliana, that I was very much involved in different humanistic fields and battles. And for me, the essential legacy of humanism is the respect of the person, of the singularity. This is the end, this is the summit of our values. Freedom, equality, liberty, and so on, of course. But the center of this is the respect of the singularity. And the singularity has to be matched with another one. And this coupling is essential for the continuation of the planet and the species. So the couch is also one place, maybe one of the rare places when these problematics can be followed and deepened in a singular way. That's why sometimes I say that we don't have answers, but we propose a poetic for each patient, and we leave him in the social work in order to make understand this poetic, to share this poetic. And this will be the optimal end of the psychoanalytic cure, not to become a president of the republic, a businessman, not to have a lot of money, but to have his own or her own poetic and to share it with others. So because we have been trained to hear this in ourselves and to detect it in the other, this singularity, this transformability. It is a wage, it is an utopia, but I'll be happy to do this work of psychoanalysis with this utopia.
Okay. Could you come back to the title of your presentation and speak more about how you understand the ethics of the feminine? Do you see it as common to men and women? And then how do you understand its origins? Are you in agreement with Viviane Chetri-Vatina's proposition?
I know very well Viviane. She's a very nice person, but I don't know to what position you refer. And as far as the question is concerned, I think I already answered this question, because for me there are not men and women from the both sides of the barricade, but there is feminine and masculine, and it's shareable because of this bisexuality. It's even more than bisexuality. We are babies, we are birds, we are roses and trees. Well, a lot of possible identifications of the human subjectivity with the multiplicity of our affects and the sensations. So this pluralization of the human being that is also required by internet, when you are not constrained by some ideologies that flourishing to the internet also that are very dreadful. There is also by internet and this open globalization, interconnection and so on, there is an invitation to be pluralized, to adhere to different culture and memories. And we have to deal with this, with our comprehension of the individual. The individual is a multiverse.
It was only a part of the question, because there's another part and it goes on the question saying, could you say so, agree with Viviana Chetri-Vatina and with Harriet Rolfe of a possible matriarchal way of government?
Maybe this is a threat. I don't know. I don't fear this. As far as psychoanalysis exists, we will not allow the coming back to the matriarchal society is possible, would be possible. I cannot see what will be the how to say the situation that makes this question possible. Of course, if you see the situation, for instance, in Africa, where the mothers are the true rulers of the family and even the society, avoiding eventually the mafia behaviors that abuses, etc. There is a big role to be given, and that exists already, of women. We can say also that the artificial procreation, surrogate women, etc., makes the feminine body not only as a merchandise body, but as the body that dictates the market, that has a power on the market, because we have made children through women. So there are some aspects in the modern way that give power to the mother. But at the same time, one of the previous questions was also the anxiety connected with the thirdness, the authority of the other sex, of fathers. And as far as this anxiety, this questioning exists, I don't think that we're threatened by a sort of emprise of what is it? Overtaking of the power of the archaic mother. In this direction, my investigation of what I call maternal eroticism is something that doesn't give power or any authority to women, but investigates the complexity of this experience, the reliance, what I call the reliance of maternity, is not only the capacity to make the link and to transmit language, all the positive aspects, the tenderness, the alchemy of eroticism into tenderness, and this aspects of maternity that opens the path of language and culture. But it's also what one of the questions asked, the abjection, the rejection of the infantile body by the mother, the aggressivity between the two, the dark side of motherhood, which makes problems to the child, but also to the woman herself, cause of frigidity, of psychosis, of melancholy. All these aspects of maternity makes that women, a lot of women may avoid to become mothers. This is also an aspect of the modern experience of female sexuality. How to be a mother, it is a vogue, it is a fashion, but at the same time People are afraid to do this. They have to frozen their oocytes and to wait for a good day, and maybe this good day will never. It's a very conflictual situation. It's not a paradise, motherhood. The reliance is very exposed and controversial experience, very risky one. And there was no question about that, but I was interested by it in my paper on the Congress. The motherhood and maternity reliance crosses the question of death, the death of the child, my death, and the impossibility to bring the child until his autonomy. The knowledge of the knowledge, not only the knowledge, but the experience in the giving birth, of the risk of life, of the both participants of the act of the birth, the child, of the mother, and this presence of the death in the experience, the feelings, the emotions, and the unconscious of women is something very, very present and very incisive. We have this in the myth of the Virgin Mary. She gives birth, but she knows that he will die. We have the Pietà with the cult of the birth. Freud gives us a very interesting anecdote when he presents, he has a memory of his early childhood when his mother is making noodles, and the skin of her hands is wrapping, il tombe avec la pâte. The flour, but it's the skin is tombe, s'effrite, coming off with the dough, and she was she presents the end of the life. She's a sort of she's making a dough to nourish him, but at the same time she represents the sort of decay, of end of the life. The skin is going off, falling off. And his mother he doesn't remember what she said, but afterwards, when he have read Shakespeare, he thinks that she said something meaning tu dois une mort à la nature. You owe a death to the nature. So he experienced that her mother has a power to nourish him, but also she knew that he was mortal, and she presented this mortality through these gestures of making falling her skin down. And this is an obsession of Freud, and because he overestimated the death instinct, and the quotation I gave in the beginning, he doubts that the eros will conquer or will prevail in humanity. Maybe the adversary, the death instinct, will prevail. He was more pessimistic than optimistic. And what was interesting for me is that his mother maybe was just realistic, and she was not menacing him, but she's just making known that in the life we live with that. And this is something essential for the motherhood, to be able to accompany life and death in us and in our children. But also what struck me is that the psychoanalyst who worked on the death drive and who maybe worked before Freud, because her paper is from 1911 and 12, and Freud worked on the question in the 20s, is Sabine Spielrein. And she said in her paper that the death drive is before and is overwhelmed by Eros. It's not the one that will conquer the humanity, it's the Eros that will conquer, but the death drive is in the process of the Eros. So it's not the one that will prevail, but it's on the way in which Eros is going. It is one part of the becoming. So it's a subordinating of the death drive to the life. But it's a sort of co-presence in which, nevertheless, the life will win. So this is something also essential to the feminine psyche. We know that the death is here. We are here, we're aware, where the anxiety of that is there, but we wage for the life. And this is something also that is familiar, I think, to this psychoanalytic hearing to the anxieties that we cross in the couch.
Thank you. We have 5 more minutes, so I will try to give you some questions and you will answer as it is possible. Is this feminine you talk about present in men too, or it is in female body only?
Can you repeat again? Is it feminine and female?
Is this feminine you talk about, is it present in men too, or it is in female body only? And a second question that is related, is the feminine is to exist, if the feminine is to exist beyond a language that is symbolically masculine, how does the feminine communicate in the multiverse?
I'll just answer to the first question, the first part of the question, because I think this question crosses different other questions and answers that we had before. I mentioned that we are on the eve or in the process of a unique acceleration of the human species and the civilization, and in the same time we are in possession of the extraordinary memory of the humanity. And this memory that made me go to the pre-humans, the caves and the groves, etc., established a patriarchal society in which the symbolic, the law, the authority, the interdictions, the taboo are connected with the paternal function, the father, the third. This is still present and will influence long ago in the coming years our mentality and our behavior. And at the same time, the emancipation of women, the society of image going across and against a little bit the verbal society, the crisis of masculinity and paternity in modern days makes us consider that the feminine was non-estimated, non-recognized, and masculine was overestimated and enclosed in some schemas that are supposed to be the schemas of the patriarchal society. So the feminine and the masculine are the heritages from the long memory. And when I deconstruct them in finding in the feminine this transformability, we have to make the same thing in the masculinity and to try to envisage the cohabitations of the two. But the differences still remain. They'll be new, but in this modernity and this renewing, we have to take into account of the past and the ancient, the immemorial differences. So, well, in a crossroad where the memory is important to take into consideration and the disruption of the memory in the modern families also. And the role of the psychoanalysis is to be on the cross of these tendencies. Voilà.
Okay. Thank you very much. It was very, very rich and very, very interesting. We would like to thank you, me and my colleagues from the IPA editorial website editorial board. To thank you very much. And I would like also to announce the upcoming webinar that is Violent Radicalization and Lone Wolf Terrorism for the 24th of November. So, dear Julia, thank you very much for this wonderful presentation, for this wonderful and very interesting discussion. We will have to continue to answer to some questions, so probably we will send you.
Thank you.
Thank to all of our participants. Thank you very much. Thank you, all of you. Bye-bye.
Merci. Bye-bye.